My dad was a musician in the late 80s, 90s, and he would normally work together with his best friend, who also played the music and edited what they wrote. Both having young families at the time, the quiet and solace they both needed to be creative was hard to come by. A solution was found. They would both rent a cottage for a weekend and take their equipment with them in order to write some good songs. I've no idea how they found it, possibly by word of mouth, but they ended up renting an old miner's cottage in Minehead, England, that was fairly rural and isolated. It was very picturesque and had minimal traffic going by, and no neighbours either side, I believe. It's worth remembering that at the time, both my dad and his friend were practicing spiritual mediums, and therefore quite attuned to strange atmospheres and spiritual goings on. Anyway, my dad said that he instantly felt uncomfortable upon entering the small cottage. He told me that the atmosphere was heavy and quite unwelcoming. Ignoring it, as he had paid money to be there, he and his friends set up their keyboards in the front room and got to work. The cottage had a small wooden front door and a back door leading to a small enclosed garden. To get to the back door, you would have to go through the kitchen. Upstairs were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. As the night went on, nothing too strange happened. A glass of water that had been placed on the side mysteriously drained itself of liquid, and the unwelcoming feeling intensified, but nothing physically manifested as such. My dad and his friend were both discussing a piece they were editing, when suddenly there were 2 very loud thumps on the front door. Thinking it may be the old woman who owned the cottages and who lived up the road, my dad went to answer. He opened the door, but there was nothing there but the dark of an English countryside. Cursing whomever was playing jokes on them, Dad went back inside. No sooner had he set foot into the living room, the thumping on the door began again. This time, they both sprinted out and pulled open the door. Again, nothing. However, almost as soon as they pulled the door open, the thumping began, this time from the back door of the cottage. Dad's friends sprinted out, but surprisingly, there was no one to be seen, not even after shining a torch outside. This continued for a little while, unsettling both men, as they were both also picking up a negative energy. Both eager to call it a night, they packed away and went upstairs to their respective rooms. Dad found it hard to settle, and read a book too about 1 a.m. before drifting off into a night's sleep. This was short-lived, and he awoke to his friend screaming as if he was being violently attacked. Dad rushed to the adjoining room where he found his friend cowering in a corner and shaking. Apparently he had been awoken by a big burly bloke trying to get into his bed with him. A quick search of the cottage revealed no one corporeal to be there. As the friend's room had 2 single beds, my dad offered to keep him company as he was severely shaken. Trying to make light of the situation, my dad began joking that the ghost might just fancy his friend, and that he had been trying to get into his bed to have his way with him. No sooner had my dad said this, a large pair of his friend's hiking boots lifted itself up and violently rocketed across the room to hit the side of his head. At this point, the 2 decided that staying downstairs would be better, and made haste to get out of the room. In the morning, they packed their things away and before travelling home, stopped at the house of the old woman who owned the cottage to tell her of what happened. She was genuinely surprised, saying that she didn't know the cottage was haunted, but telling both men that one of her other properties was usually the one that received complaints of being disturbingly active with ghosts. For some reason, my parents rented the same house out for a family holiday this year after, but I can happily report that we had no ghostly experiences there. Me and my friend had heard of this notorious spot near where we live, where people would drive out there, lose service, and then their cars would shut off and not work until they hit one of the other roads. We decided to go out there with my board and see if we could make any contact. Down this road, there was a turn off that was gated off, but there was no lock on the gate and was wide open, so we drove down the side road that took us to a house foundation with a torn down stone house. My friends S, J, K, and my BF at the time, D. Me and my friends J and K started with the Ouija, my BF D and my friend S blazing in front while we girls were in the back of the truck. And we got contact right away. This entity we talked to seemed to be 2 children. The spelling was childlike and even playful. The talk seemed to be asking us about our clothes and stuff like that. Then it went silent, and these 2 twin entities, or so it said, were scared of another present entity, which was apparently their father, who as ghosts go a right creep. The children kind of kept coming and going periodically, between when their father would leave. As we talked to them, they told us how he hurt Mommy, and when she was gone, he'd hurt them too. Now, we didn't think much of this, until we took a walk around the property and found a ditch full of house belongings, kids' toys in duplicate and 2 kid-sized Led Zeppelin shirts side by side. This basically confirmed that this may be real. We had lost contact with all the entities at one point, and the father pretty mad at us. Can't exactly remember why. We had spent hours communicating, talking with these entities in my friend's truck. And with that, many people in the vehicle, the windows will fog up. This is when shit starts getting really weird. On the inside of the fogged up window was one child-sized handprint. Just one. And it was skeletal. My friend Jay, who had small hands, measured her hand against it, and it was far too small, and the window was not fogging up in that spot again. Shortly after we spotted this handprint, bang! Something hit the roof of Vess's truck so hard, the roof bowed in and then back out. You have never seen 5 people clown car out of a truck so fast. We searched on top of the truck, in the box, on the ground. Nothing. We thought maybe a branch had broken off a tree that we were under, or maybe a goose. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. When we checked the roof, 2 handprints, adult-sized. We're a bit freaked out at this point, so we all get back into the truck, and my friend S tries to start it. It won't start, and we couldn't get any reception on any phone. I was in the back looking out the window, and I had noticed this strange mist coming over the grass towards us. I've never seen fog or mist move like this. As it got closer, it formed into a column and it turned into the shape of a tribesman. It was wearing a type of headdress with feathers, shoes, a necklace that looked like pants, and moccasins, and was bare-chested. Took about 4 steps, and it was steps because the grass moved and I could distinctly make out every detail. And disintegrated back into the mist floating across the ground, travelled in front of my friend's truck, and moved off down a path through the trees. My friend S had seen it too, and tried to start his truck again. It started to try and follow it. We got close to the direction it had moved, and the truck turned off again. My friend was annoyed at his truck because this never happens. We decided it's time to go, and had to wait for his truck to start again. The truck turned off 3 more times before we could leave this area, and once more when we were on the road out of there. My friend was truck savvy, and he could not figure out what was wrong with it. His truck never did this ever again either. Me and a friend of mine, Jess, were playing with the Ouija. She really wanted to try it, but she'd only done it during the day, so this happened about 3 PM in the afternoon. We started with the board. The planchette just went around and around, and the board, nothing happened. Kept asking questions, just round and round. This probably went on for about 30 minutes. That's when we heard something hit my bedroom door and start scratching. My friend was scared. I went to the door and opened it. Nothing. Then again, bang. This time the sound was coming from my front door. My mum's computer was right beside the door, and she was sitting there. She didn't actually hear anything. She had her headphones in. I came down the stairs and looked at her and say, "Can't you hear that scratching?" She said, "No." As I'm standing there, bang, again, scratch, scratch, scratch. I go and look through the peephole and see nothing. So I looked through our side window, and a dog looked in the window at me, looking confused as to why I wasn't letting him in. It was a Dobie cross of some type, looked friendly enough. So I opened the door. The dog just stood there looking at me. So I waved my hand and said, "Go home." The dog looked confused, hopped off my steps, and took off. Was it paranormal, or just a weird coincidence? Either way, my friend wouldn't use the Ouija board again. My 9-year-old son recently started having issues sleeping in his room. Not that it came on all of a sudden, but we noticed that he started wanting one of us to sleep with him, or he would just come over to our bed. Now, since birth, he's never been afraid to sleep in his bed alone. Just recently, we have noticed that he would make excuses or play games to avoid going to his room alone. He has never been the type of kid that had nightmares or scared of the dark. Even when we moved into our house, he quickly adjusted. The only time he started having nightmares was last year, about this time, when the news was all about the pandemic, and he started having nightmares that we were all going to die from the virus. So quickly, it became a rule in our house to turn the news off. Last night it finally came to a head, as my wife was doing some last-minute chores and putting clothes away in his closet. He started to freak out about his closet doors being opened suddenly. I realised that I have seen his closet doors open, well, really ever. I asked my wife if she is always closing them, and she said that no, our son doesn't want them open. The way he was scared looked so out of place with him and not normal. I asked him to sit on the bed with me and told him he could tell Daddy anything. After almost 45 minutes of him just shaking his head and avoiding answering my questions, I told him that if anything or anyone told him not to tell me, that it was okay, because I'm Daddy and I can fix it. I'd assumed that either a kid at school or cousin or a YouTube video had scared him. He said no one scared him about his closet. So then I told him, well, sometimes you hear the house settling due to wood expansion and contracting. I told him if it's noises that you can hear, it's normal for older homes. I asked him if there was something that is in his closet that he doesn't like, that I can get rid of. He started crying silently, and I grabbed him and hugged him and said that whatever it is, just tell me. I'm not going to be mad. You're not in trouble, and it's Daddy's job to protect you. I turned him towards me and said, "Look in my eyes and please tell Daddy what it is." He started rolling down tears his cheeks and looked down and said, "The skulls come out at night from the floor and come up and look at me sleeping." I wasn't expecting that. I had a knot in my stomach and a lump in my throat and said, "It's okay. Sometimes we just have bad imaginations and it scares us." I said, "When did you start having these nightmares?" And he said they are not nightmares. They come when I wake up and see them. I told him, "You know how you have imagination that gives you good ideas? Well, sometimes when we are trying to sleep, our imagination gives us bad thoughts that try and scare us." I told him, "When Daddy sleeps in your room, you show me or tell me when you're scared and I will investigate." He still insists on the closet doors being shut. We moved from a small, cosy home to a much larger old Victorian terraced house in a busy part of the city. The house had been an old shop and had a separate new annex that had been built along the side of it. This was perfect, as we had moved to accommodate my nan, who needed care around the clock, but she didn't want to move into a nursing home. The house was huge, with a long tree-lined garden. The newer parts were light and airy, but the oldest parts of the building were, despite a lot of renovation, still quite dark and creepy. It wasn't ideal, as the area wasn't great, but my parents needed somewhere quickly, and it was the best available. Mum worked long hours in a sales job, and Dad schooled myself and my sister from home. This meant that we could also help care for my nan when Mum wasn't around. The 5 or so years that we lived there were very stressful, to say the least, with money worries and health worries for our nan, who sadly had dementia. I won't go into huge detail, but I just wanted to paint a picture for you. As mentioned before, my parents were heavily into the spiritual and supernatural, but more in an investigative way. Dad had previously worked as a medium, but had distanced himself from the scene due to not taking people seriously anymore, and feeling a bit disillusioned with the whole thing. My sister, being a bit of a princess, had bagged the largest bedroom for herself when we moved. It also happened to be part of the new build, and I was left with a smaller, dark room at the top of the stairs. I didn't mind too much, as we had previously had to share. It was just nice to have my own space. The bedrooms were connected via a long, rather narrow and gloomy landing, which had a bathroom in the middle. My sister's bedroom was right at the end, and it was above the new kitchen and annex. My room was typically old-fashioned, with a large bricked-up fireplace and dated floral wallpaper. The first night I slept there, I was nervous for no good reason, and didn't sleep well the whole night. I put this down to it being a new space, but honestly, the feeling never really left during my time there. This part of my life was not great. I was dealing with being a teenager and feeling lonely due to being home educated and not having any friends. There was also the stress of helping look after Nan, who needed total care, and the added bonus of being bullied by local kids. I struggled with extreme depression and began to have really dark and negative thoughts towards myself. I'm not blaming the house for this, but it certainly seemed to amplify the atmosphere somehow. This might sound weird, but I believe that whatever was there fed off my negativity and intensified the activity. The first things that happened were small: doors opening and closing, things going missing for no reason and then turning up in random places, knockings and tappings on the wall. Dad tried not to scare us by talking about it, but he later said that he always felt a pressure in that house and knew there was at least one entity there. I think the first big thing for me was seeing a large black triangle of smoke just drift across the front room one day. I had been sitting reading on the sofa when I looked up and saw this thing, maybe 4 foot tall, made of thick black smoke, slowly hover across the room and disappear into the wall. The whole experience lasted around 20 seconds, and my brain didn't really process it properly. The shape had been a perfect triangle. No one believed me when I told them, and I can't quite explain it still. Next came large orbs of light that would zip across the room, and more often than not, seemingly go up the stairs and disappear. This was not only seen by me, but by the whole family. Mum blamed car headlights, but we would usually have the heavy curtains drawn, and no other real sources of moving light. The orbs would vary in size, more often than not being around the size of a closed fist. This was followed by tappings and knockings on the wall as they appeared and then disappeared up into the staircase. Whatever was there liked to move things around. Mum and Dad liked to collect ornaments, and we had a few around the TV. One being this cool little stone statue of a hooded lady with a small crystal ball in her lap. One day, Dad and I were playing computer games when the stone statue suddenly lifted maybe 20 centimeters off of the unit and then slammed back down again with enough force to make a loud bang. That was the beginning of the more intense activity. I began to hear my name being called. This would only happen when I was downstairs, in the dining room that was linked to the staircase upstairs. I would hear a voice, sometimes female and sometimes male, calling me by my name, seemingly from upstairs. It freaked me out, but I didn't want to say anything to my parents, as they were stressed enough at this point without me adding disembodied voices to their list. During this time, my depression intensified, and I began harming myself and having very bleak, suicidal thoughts. In the night, I would see dark shapes in my bedroom and flashing lights, but I was just too numb to care anymore, and I would disregard them. I had a small cat that used to come into my bedroom as he hated the dog, and would come through my window on a night to get some peace. Every night at 3 a.m, without fail, he would leap from my bed and scramble to get out the window again. I put this down to being a weird cat thing, but at 3 a.m. the atmosphere in my room would also change, becoming much darker. This would be when I saw shadows and lights. I told no one this, thinking that possibly it was all in my head. One night, Mum was out working and I was awake, keeping an ear out in case my nan woke up and needed help, as she frequently got confused and asked for a cup of tea late into the night. I suddenly heard a blast of noise, like a loud radio, and then doors slamming, followed by the sound of my sister screaming in terror. She ran into my room, beside herself with fear. Once she had calmed down, she explained that her radio had suddenly turned itself on at full volume, and at the same time all of her window and doors had fully opened. Indeed, when I went to investigate, her windows were all open, and the radio was blasting static through the speakers. She slept in with me that night, and then told me the following day that she would rather sleep in her room after all that than stay in mine again. It's just creepy, she told me. All of this was weird, but then came the time that I physically saw what I think was an apparition. I haven't talked about the upstairs bathroom yet. It was seemingly normal, but definitely had the strangest vibe. I didn't even like going in there, as it felt like someone was watching, but it was the nearest bathroom to me, and the only one with a shower, so I used it reluctantly. One day, I was brushing my teeth at the sink, when I looked up and saw, in the mirror behind me, a woman in a white dressing gown. She was around 30, with long blonde hair and dark circles under her eyes. She was stood directly behind me, and was staring at my reflection with a very blank, heavy gaze. I had never seen her before in my life. She looked completely real, but I got such a feeling of wrongness and fear that I just dropped the toothbrush and ran. Of course, no one else had been visiting, and the rest of my family were downstairs. This shook me up so much. I refused to go into that bathroom for a while, and would wash my hair in the kitchen sink instead of showering. I told no one about her, but tried to draw her from memory in my sketchbook. I'm a pretty good artist, but the picture that I drew was technically flawless, and not something that a 14-year-old girl should be able to produce. It scared me so much that I burnt the picture straight after, and tried to forget about it. One day, during the worst bit of my depression, I was reading in the dining room. My dad had laid down for a bit in the sofa in the next room, and I assumed that he was asleep. My parents were also super stressed at this time, and he was probably really tired and run down. After a while, he walked into the dining room and gave me a strange look. Now, bear in mind that he used to work and make a living from being a medium for this next bit. He asked me who had been visiting my room in the night. Confused, I replied that no one had. He went blank for a second, kind of switched off, and then said, No, there's a woman, and you've been seeing stuff in your room. Of course, I knew exactly what he meant, but not wanting my folks to know, I still denied it. He went quiet again, and then told me that someone had told him about the woman that I had seen, and that I was in danger of hurting myself, and that she was feeding off of me. All of this hit home, and I finally broke down and explained about all of it, even the self-harm and suicide attempts. It was very traumatic, and I hated upsetting my parents, but it was what needed to happen. Later, Dad went up to cleanse my room. He didn't seem satisfied afterwards, however, and my parents renovated the summer house in the garden to be my new bedroom. It was cold in winter, but I instantly felt lighter and better in there. There was no longer that constant dread. Towards the end of our time there, we learnt a little about the previous owners from an old neighbour. I have no idea if any of this is true, as I never found proof, but I certainly need to include it. Apparently, in the late 90s, a family had lived in the old shop. Something was wrong with the older daughter, who had mental health issues, and she had sadly ended up taking her own life in the city park one night. Like I said, I don't know if this is true, as I never asked for her name, but it does make me wonder if part of her never left the house. and if she had used my bedroom before me. It would certainly explain a lot of the activity. This happened a few months back. I was home alone and just chilling in my room. My dogs often like to lay with me, and this particular day, they were doing just that. My parents were at work, dad in another city, and mum at the school she works at. And my siblings were at school, and I know for sure that no one was home. So I'm just doing my homework, and I hear a couple of knocks at my door. My dogs immediately look up and stare silently towards the door. Maybe my brother was just home. I call out his name and open the door when I don't hear anything. Well, you guessed it, there was no one there. Odd. The thing is, if it was a random person who just happened to break into my house, my dogs would have went berserk and are weirdly keen at only barking at strangers indoors. Besides, I never hear any footsteps. I double check the time and notice it's only 10 a.m. Unless my siblings or mom got sick, there was no way they were coming home at this time. I was later assured that no such thing happened. I've had a couple of odd occurrences, such as things going missing and being replaced in the same exact spot only hours later. I used to dabble in the occult as a middle schooler, so maybe that's why. Our house was brand new when we got it, and it was only built on empty farmland. Animals have souls, I have no doubt, and love us as much as we love them. My first experience with the spirits of a deceased pet was my Siamese cat, Brandy. In life, she loved to lie in wait in the bathroom, waiting for the moment I passed by the door, and then she would pounce on my feet as I walked by. As soon as I would let out a scream, she would be on her merry way, having achieved her mischievous goal. She used to sleep with my middle son in his crib from time after he was born, curled up by his tiny head, watching over him as he slept. As he grew and moved to the top bunk bed, so did she, still curled up next to him. Time went on, and one day she stopped using the litter box, so I shut her in the laundry room downstairs to avoid any accidents on the carpet until I could get her to the vet. A few days later, when I took her to the vet, he advised that she had a tumour, and most likely it was cancerous. He also said that the prognosis, even with treatments, wasn't good. So I made the heart-wrenching decision to put her to sleep. I don't know how long it was after she passed, but I would walk down the hall to the bedrooms during the day, and I would see her curled up in her spot on the top bunk. The first time I saw this, I stopped and did a double take. But of course, the second time I looked, I didn't see her. One day, I took a load of laundry downstairs, and when my bare foot hit the concrete floor, I recoiled, screamed, and dropped the basket full of dirty clothes. The floor was warm, not cold like the concrete should have been. It was early in the day, too early for the afternoon sun to shine through the small window. I collected myself and cautiously used my hands to feel the floor. She was a petite little thing, and sure enough, the warm spot I felt was in the size and shape of my little Brandy, curled up in front of the washer. Apparently she had used that spot to sleep when I had kept her there. We moved from that house long ago. I'd like to think that when my middle son is in his bed in his home, maybe, just maybe, there's a petite little spirit curled up next to his head, still watching over him as he sleeps. I grew up in the house my grandfather built in western Nebraska with my parents and two sisters. There were always odd noises. Footsteps, knocks, bangs and slamming doors. Everyone would be at the table eating dinner together, and we would all hear a door slamming upstairs. Dead of winter, no windows open, and the house had no central heating. We all would just look at each other. My dad would usually make a lame joke to ease the tension. Once, my sister and I were home alone and heard noises coming from the north bedroom upstairs. The room was used for storage, so no one slept there. The noises sounded like water running and a person moving around. It was unusually loud and continued on for quite some time. We were so scared by what we heard that we ran to our grandma's house to wait for Mum and Dad to get home. When they did, my sister asked if there had ever been a bathroom upstairs. Mom said yes, the north bedroom had been a bathroom years ago. My sister and I just looked at each other. I was around 8 or 9 at the time, and I was so freaked out, I decided to work up my courage and ask my mom if there were ghosts in the house. I really was expecting her to hug me and tell me it was just my imagination, but instead, she just looked at me and said, "They're just family, honey. They won't hurt you." I felt my heart hit the floor. Some of the activity may have been residual, but something used to walk the hallway upstairs where we were sleeping. We always slept with the hall light on. One sister saw it as a clown. I don't remember what the other sister saw, but me being a child of the 60s saw cousin It from the Addams Family. It looked like a grey mist, kinda in the shape of a person. I guess I rationalised it as being something I was familiar with. But it still scared the crap out of me, seeing it float down the hall. All I could do was face the wall and pray that it didn't come into my room.